Welcome to Let's Analyze Silent Hill 2. As you could probably tell from the spoiler warning, this analysis can apply to both the original Silent Hill 2, released in 2001, and the remake, published in 2024. We don't speak of the HD remaster. In this episode, we'll be discussing how players can pick up on the trouble in James and Mary's marriage before James even enters Silent Hill. In the hauntingly atmospheric world of Silent Hill 2, the complexities of human relationships are explored through a lens of tragedy and psychological horror, particularly focusing on the marriage between James Sunderland and his late wife, Mary. Silent Hill 2 is often celebrated for its intricate storytelling, full of symbolism, yet it also serves as a critique of idealized notions of love and marriage. While many may view marriage as a sanctuary, Silent Hill 2 unearths the darker realities that can lie beneath the surface. Through a careful analysis of symbolism, intertextual references, and narrative elements, it becomes evident that James and Mary's marriage was far from perfect. The signs of their troubled marriage start long before James enters the titular town. This prelude is crucial. It establishes a backdrop of emotional turbulence and disillusionment that colors James's journey. Silent Hill 2 not only invites players to confront their own interpretations of love and loss, but also exposes the fragility of human connections in the face of grief and guilt, ultimately transforming the marriage of James and Mary into something that players can sense is just not quite right, even before we enter the town proper. In this first section, we will look closely at some small details, evident in just the first few minutes of the game. James's missing wedding ring, the language used in Mary's letter, and both James and Mary's surnames. A keen eye can spot that James is not wearing his wedding ring in the opening shot of the game. This seemingly minor detail carries a profound weight, hinting at a disconnect within their relationship. The absence of the ring, a symbol of marital commitment, suggests a strain or distance between the couple. Did James remove the ring after a fight with Mary? How long has he been without the ring? Certainly not long, judging by the tan line, so we can gather it was recently removed. Since we do know that James did, in fact, murder Mary by smothering her, a more heartbreaking interpretation of this is that he removed the ring to not accidentally hurt Mary with the hard metal as he pressed the soft pillow to her face. A last act of kindness and mercy from an already broken man. No matter James's actual reason for removing the ring, the symbolism is clear. This is a marriage that does not exist anymore, whether because of the distance between man and wife, or because James subconsciously remembers that Mary is no longer alive and that he is responsible. Upon first reading Mary's letter, it does seem to be a lonely invitation from a loving wife who may or may not actually be dead. However, a closer read tells us something quite different. The very first line of Mary's letter reads, "In my restless dreams, I see that town, Silent Hill." It's very reminiscent of the first line of the 1938 Gothic horror, Rebecca, which reads, "Last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again." Like Silent Hill 2, some major themes of Rebecca are love and marriage, death and memory, and justice and punishment. Rebecca is the late wife of the protagonist's new husband, and is sanctified by all who knew her. Soon, however, the facade unravels, and it is revealed that Rebecca was cruel and adulterous, driving her husband to madness until he killed her in a fit of rage. Rebecca, like Mary, had a terminal illness, and it is implied that she might have manipulated her husband into killing her to avoid a more painful death. However, it's possible that, like Mary, she was simply lonely, afraid, and lashed out at the person she was supposed to seek comfort from. The second line of Mary's letter is not a request, not a wistful remembrance, but an accusation. "You promised you would take me there again someday, but you never did. You promised, and you broke that promise." She continues, "Well, I'm alone there now." The "well" in connection with the prior accusation seems passive-aggressive, and tying these two sentences together also ties together alone with the accusation. It's James's fault that Mary is alone. He was supposed to take her back to Silent Hill, and he failed her. At first glance, James's surname, Sunderland, seems like a mere geographical reference to a town in England, but its etymological roots are far more significant. The word sunder means to tear apart, to separate. a subtle reflection of James's emotional state and his fractured relationship with Mary. The idea of tearing apart underscores James's psychological fragmentation, where the bond he once had with Mary is irreparably broken by both his actions and his inability to confront the truth. Oddly enough, Silent Hill 2 gives us Mary's maiden name, a detail that can only be purposeful. In contrast with James's name, Mary's maiden name, Shepherd, carries a more positive and nurturing connotation, implying guidance, care, and a sense of wholeness, much like the idealized version of Mary that James clings to throughout the game. The name evokes a sense of warmth and order, symbolizing Mary's role as a figure who, in James's memories, once represented emotional stability. However, this idealized image is constantly at odds with the reality of Mary's suffering and her relationship with James. While Mary's surname suggests unity and the act of bringing together, James's surname reflects separation and disintegration. Their relationship, much like their names, is torn between these two opposing forces, gathering and tearing apart, unity and fracture. James's journey through Silent Hill is, in a sense, the manifestation of his inner struggle between these two opposing forces. The desire for redemption and healing, represented by the nurturing shepherd, and the inevitability of emotional collapse and separation, embodied by the destructive Sunderland. The tension between these names highlights the core tragedy of James and Mary's relationship, where love is constantly at war with guilt. For this next section, we'll be looking at the settings of the game's introduction: the fog, the bathroom, and the forest. I'm including the fog as a separate setting because the fog also intermingles with areas that are not the forest, and it has symbolism of its own. First up, we'll be discussing the fog, and we'll be looking at the fog in Scarlett's Nightmares and Gone with the Wind. Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind, originally published in 1936, is a historical romance set against the backdrop of the American Civil War and its aftermath. The novel follows Scarlett O'Hara, a headstrong Southern belle, as she navigates the challenges of war, loss, and societal change. For this analysis, we are actually focusing on the 1939 movie adaptation, which added details about Scarlett's nightmares that are not in the original novel. In both Gone with the Wind and Silent Hill, fog serves as a potent visual and symbolic element, representing the characters' internal struggles and the confusion clouding their understanding of reality. In Gone with the Wind, Scarlett O'Hara navigates the fog of the South's changing social landscape, a fog that mirrors her own inability to reconcile her desires with the world around her. Similarly, in Silent Hill 2, the perpetual fog that surrounds James Sunderland as he searches for Mary functions as a manifestation of his emotional blindness and his fractured understanding of their troubled marriage. The fog that pervades Silent Hill reflects James's inability to confront the complexities of his emotional state, much like Scarlett's refusal to face the realities of her personal relationships. Scarlett's relationships with Rhett Butler and Ashley Wilkes are central to her emotional confusion, and the fog in her story symbolizes her inability to fully understand or engage with these connections. In the same way, the fog in Silent Hill 2 is a manifestation of James's emotional blindness, particularly in relation to his feelings for Mary. The more James explores the town, the more he is confronted with grotesque and distorted versions of his memories, yet the fog prevents him from fully acknowledging the truth. Just as Scarlett's understanding of her desires is clouded by her idealized notions of Ashley and her refusal to face the disintegration of her marriage to Rhett, James is similarly locked in a cycle of denial and idealization. The fog obscures his path, both physically in the game's environment and emotionally in his internal journey. Next, we'll be discussing the fog in Withering Heights. Emily Bronte's Withering Heights, originally published in 1847, is a Gothic novel set on the bleak Yorkshire moors. It follows the passionate and destructive love between Catherine Earnshaw and Heathcliff, two characters whose intense emotions drive the plot. The novel explores themes of love, revenge, and the destructive power of obsession. In Withering Heights, Bronte uses the setting of the moors and the pervasive fog to reflect the turbulent emotional landscape of the characters, particularly the obsessive and destructive relationship between Heathcliff and Catherine. The fog in Withering Heights serves as both a literal and metaphorical barrier, obscuring clarity and creating an atmosphere of uncertainty and isolation. This symbolic use of fog in Bronte's novel shares significant similarities with the fog in Silent Hill 2, where the fog becomes a representation of James Sunderland's guilt and confusion. Both works use fog to blur the boundaries between reality and the characters' perceptions, creating an environment where truth is obscured and the characters are forced to confront their inner darkness. In Withering Heights, the moors are frequently described as a desolate, mist-shrouded landscape, vast and isolating, with fog that mirrors the emotional isolation and confusion of the characters. The fog of the moors is disorienting, much like Catherine and Heathcliff's emotions, which are clouded by love, jealousy, and an obsession that dooms them both. As Catherine and Heathcliff navigate their bleak landscape, their love becomes increasingly destructive, mirroring the dark forces of the fog itself. In this way, the fog in Withering Heights is not just an atmospheric element, but a key symbol of the characters' inability to escape their own emotional entanglements and the haunting consequences of their passions. Similarly, in Silent Hill 2, the dense fog that envelops the town of Silent Hill is symbolic of James Sunderland's mental state, particularly his feelings of guilt and denial surrounding his wife Mary's death. As James journeys through the fog, it becomes clear that the environment itself is a manifestation of his psyche, disorienting, obscured, and filled with a sense of loss. Much like the fog on the moors in Withering Heights, the fog in Silent Hill 2 is not simply an aesthetic choice, but an emotional and psychological landscape. James's quest through the fog-shrouded town represents his search for clarity and redemption, but the fog keeps the truth obscured, much like Catherine and Heathcliff's inability to fully understand or control the destructive force of their emotions. Both Withering Heights and Silent Hill 2 blur the lines between romance and gothic horror, with the fog serving as a key symbol of the darker, more sinister aspects of human emotion. While Withering Heights is often characterized as a romance, it carries the hallmarks of gothic horror, a tale of obsessive love, haunting regret, and destructive passion. The fog on the moors reflects the eerie, otherworldly quality of the characters' relationships, where love is not pure or redemptive, but dark and suffocating. Similarly, Silent Hill 2, often classified as psychological horror, incorporates elements of personal tragedy, where James's journey is driven by his obsessive desire to find closure with his deceased wife. Alright, grab your popcorn, because for discussing the bathroom, you're going to view two video clips. The first one is from Twin Peaks. Twin Peaks is a surreal mystery drama series originally airing between 1990 and 1991, created by David Lynch. Set in the quaint town of Twin Peaks, Washington, the show delves into the bizarre circumstances surrounding the murder of high school homecoming queen Laura Palmer. In this scene, it has just been revealed that Leland Palmer, Laura's father, is possessed by a supernatural entity known as Bob. Yes, it's called Bob. In the scene, Leland stares into a bathroom mirror. Let's watch. Just as in Silent Hill 2, a pivotal scene involving a bathroom mirror serves as a powerful visual metaphor for a character's psychological unraveling and the confrontation with their darker selves. In Twin Peaks, Leland Palmer's chilling moment of realization when he gazes into a bathroom mirror and sees Bob's face flash over his own symbolizes the duality of his identity and the possession of his body by an external evil force. In Silent Hill 2, James similarly faces his own reflection, an image that reveals a deeper, more sinister version of himself, one that he is denying and repressing. Both scenes involve the mirror as a tool for self-confrontation, forcing the characters to come to terms with the darker aspects of their nature and the violent truths they have long avoided. Leland's gradual realization of his possession by the malevolent entity Bob reaches its peak in this bathroom scene. As Leland stares into the mirror, the reflection of his face shifts, briefly replaced by the grotesque image of Bob. The mirror becomes a boundary between his conscious self and the dark force that has overtaken him, a moment of terrifying self-awareness. This scene illustrates the theme of duality. Leland is both himself and something darker, something monstrous, and the mirror serves as a cruel reflection of his fractured identity. Both scenes utilize the mirror as a tool of revelation, but while Leland's confrontation with Bob symbolizes an external possession and loss of self, James's mirror moment in the bathroom is an internal confrontation with his own guilt and the darkness he has chosen to bury. For Leland, the mirror reveals an involuntary duality. He is both the father who loves his family and the monster who has committed unspeakable acts under Bob's control. For James, the mirror reflects the internalized horror over the murder of his own wife. In both cases, the bathroom mirror serves as a confrontation with self-deception, forcing both characters to recognize the truth about who they really are. This next clip is from The Shining, a movie referenced quite a bit in Silent Hill 2. Stanley Kubrick's 1980 psychological horror film The Shining is a chilling adaptation of Stephen King's 1977 novel. The film follows Jack Torrance, a recovering alcoholic writer, as he accepts the position as the winter caretaker of the isolated Overlook Hotel. As the family becomes trapped in the snowbound hotel, Jack's sanity unravels, leading to a descent into madness and violence. For this clip, Jack meets Lloyd Grady in the bathroom, but there's just one problem. Jack knows that Grady died years ago. Let's watch.
Mr. Grady, you were the caretaker here. I recognize you. I saw your picture in the newspapers. You, chopped your wife and daughter up into little bits. And, then you blew your brains out.
That's strange, sir. I don't have any recollection of that at all.
Mr. Grady, you were the caretaker here.
I'm sorry to differ with you, sir. But you are the caretaker. You've always been the caretaker. I should know, sir. I've always been here.
This scene in the bathroom marks a pivotal moment in Jack's descent into madness. When Jack enters the bathroom, he is greeted by the ghostly apparition of Grady, who informs Jack that he has always been the caretaker of the Overlook Hotel. The two men stand apart as though looking into a mirror, and to emphasize this, the mirror is behind Grady, meaning that to look at Grady is to look into a mirror. Grady's suggestion that Jack has always been the caretaker speaks to the idea of Jack being bound to a darker, more violent version of himself, one that he had repressed, but which now emerges in full force. The scene reveals the horrifying truth that Jack's internal collapse is not something new, but something inevitable, as if he has always been possessed by a darker side of himself that was always lurking just beneath the surface. Similarly, in Silent Hill 2, James Sunderland's bathroom scene functions as a moment of self-revelation, where he comes face to face with the consequences of his repressed guilt and trauma. Like Jack, James is confronted with an aspect of himself that he has either denied or failed to fully recognize. When James gazes into the mirror, he is not only faced with his own reflection, but also with a growing awareness of his emotional and psychological disconnect from his wife, Mary. As the environment around him becomes increasingly distorted and nightmarish, so too does his sense of identity. He is not simply trapped in a physical space. He is trapped within his own guilt and confusion, unable to separate his own desires and guilt from his perception of the world around him. While the mirror scene in Silent Hill 2 is not as explicitly supernatural as the appearance of Grady in The Shining, it shares the same psychological weight. Both characters are confronted by a distorted version of themselves, and both are forced to acknowledge their darker, more violent impulses. The comparison between these two scenes also highlights the theme of self-possession and identity collapse. In The Shining, Jack's encounter with Grady is a moment of possession, where he is not just confronted with the violence of his past actions, but with the terrifying realization that he is becoming the very monster he had once fought against. The bathroom scene symbolizes Jack's loss of autonomy as he succumbs to the hotel's supernatural influence and adopts the violent nature of the caretaker. In Silent Hill 2, while James's confrontation with his reflection is rooted in his own guilt, rather than a supernatural possession, it too signifies a loss of control. As he confronts the truth about his wife's death, James is forced to recognize that he has played a much darker role in her suffering than he ever allowed himself to admit. Both scenes symbolize a fracturing of identity, where the protagonists are not just confronting external forces, but the darkness within themselves. Now we'll be discussing the forest that James passes through on his way to Silent Hill. the long winding path just after getting out of the bathroom. First up, we'll be using Dantes Inferno as an example. Dante Alighieri's Inferno, published in the 1400s, yes, it is very old, is a harrowing epic poem that takes readers on a guided tour through the 9 circles of hell. The poet, accompanied by the Roman poet Virgil, descends into the underworld to witness the eternal punishment of sinners, each condemned to a specific torment based on their sins. James's descent into Silent Hill through a dark and oppressive forest mirrors Dante's journey through the dark woods in the Divine Comedy. The forest in Dante's Inferno is not on fire, by the way. I just added the flame effects here because it looks cool. In both cases, the forest is not merely a physical environment but a symbolic threshold, representing a liminal space between 2 realms. In the Divine Comedy, Dante's entry into the dark wood marks the beginning of his spiritual journey, a loss of innocence that signals his need for redemption. The forest is a place of moral confusion and sin, where Dante is lost and unable to see the path to salvation. James's passage through the fog-choked forest of Silent Hill is not just the beginning of his physical journey, but a symbolic descent into his own darkness. The fog and gloom obscure his surroundings, creating a sense of disorientation that mirrors his emotional state. Just as Dante is lost in his forest, James is lost within his own feelings of guilt and unresolved grief, all of which stem from his unresolved relationship with Mary. The oppressive atmosphere of the Silent Hill forest evokes a sense of spiritual decay, much like Dante's dark wood. The fog and the eerie silence creates an oppressive mood, a feeling that something is deeply wrong beneath the surface of what James perceives as reality. The environment seems to mirror James's own internal decay. Just as Dante's sin-ridden journey takes him deeper into hell, James's path through the forest takes him deeper into his memories, confronting him with the unresolved tension in his marriage and the tragic decline of Mary's health. Where Dante's forest is symbolic of his moral and spiritual disarray, James's forest is symbolic of his emotional and psychological breakdown of his relationship. As Dante's forest represents a loss of innocence and a descent into sin, James's forest signifies a breakdown in his relationship with Mary. The oppressive atmosphere and the decaying natural world mirror the deterioration of their marriage. The once vibrant and loving relationship has become a haunting memory, a ghost of its former self. The forest, with its ominous silence and decaying trees, serves as a physical manifestation of the emotional turmoil that plagues James. For this example, we'll be looking at the forest in The Lord of the Flies. Lord of the Flies is a 1954 novel by William Golding. It's a haunting exploration of human nature, where a group of schoolboys stranded on an island descend into savagery as they struggle to establish order and morality in the absence of adult authority. In Lord of the Flies, the forest is not just a physical space, but a reflection of the boys' unraveling humanity. At the beginning of the novel, the forest is an idyllic, almost benign space, a backdrop to the boys' initial attempts to establish order and community. However, as the boys' descent into chaos accelerates, the forest becomes a more ominous and threatening place. The natural world, once a symbol of innocence and possibility, begins to mirror the boys' growing violence. The dense, dark woods becomes a maze of fear and danger, where the boys are confronted with the primal instincts they have repressed. The forest symbolizes the dissolution of the thin veneer of civilization, exposing the inner darkness of the boys' psyches. In Silent Hill 2, the forest leading into the town functions in a similarly symbolic manner. Just as the boys in Lord of the Flies are alienated from the safety of civilization, James feels estranged from his past, his marriage, and his understanding of his own self. The forest outside of Silent Hill is a place of disorientation, confusion, and isolation. The fog and the dense trees obscure James's vision, much like his inability to see clearly into his own heart and mind. The forest reflects his psychological state, lost, haunted by guilt, and unable to find clear answers. The external world of Silent Hill mirrors James's internal world, a place where his buried emotions and unacknowledged guilt comes to the surface in a twisted, terrifying form. Silent Hill 2 skillfully uses its environment, symbolism, and even the characters' names to hint at the underlying emotional turmoil in James and Mary's marriage, long before the full truth is revealed. From the very beginning of the game, observant players can pick up on subtle cues that suggest this relationship is deeply troubled. By paying attention to these details, players can begin to understand that James's journey through Silent Hill is not just a physical quest, but a painful reckoning with his own guilt, the disintegration of his marriage, and the haunting consequences of his failure as a husband. In this way, Silent Hill 2 offers a complex, multi-layered narrative that encourages players to engage deeply with the emotional subtext of the game, revealing the fractured state of James and Mary's marriage long before the twist of Mary's murder is revealed. And so this was the first episode of the return of Let's Analyze Silent Hill 2. I hope you enjoyed it. As I mentioned in my Hello There video, I had been considering abandoning the series, but with the remake of Silent Hill 2 out and the wonderful response people had to my initial first video back, I think me and Let's Analyze are here to stay. I'm energized and feeling creative, and I just have a lot to say about Silent Hill. But hopefully now I can say it more coherently and with nicer production quality. The uploads of these will be sporadic, since it does take much longer to write and create and edit these videos than it does regular gameplay videos. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.